We've been talking about the way that the Labour Party is trying to navigate its way on the path back to power in a landscape with echoes of the 1970s and the 1980s. Delegates could do worse than listen to some of the party's elder statespeople, including our next guest. Charles Clarke was a Labour councillor, worked as Chief of Staff to Neil Kinnock in opposition, became an MP himself and served as Education Secretary and Home Secretary under Tony Blair. You could say he's seen it and done it all, and he joins us now. Charles Clarke, how do you think they're doing so far this weekend?
Well, first of all, Trevor, good morning. Nice to see you in a fresh Sunday morning. I think they're doing OK. I think politics has been exceptionally difficult in the time of COVID. This is the first really large person-to-person gathering that's taken place. There are many, many issues which need to be resolved. On some of them you've covered in this programme today. But I think they've put themselves up as a realistic alternative to the Conservatives, and that's what they need to be at this stage. They need to take it further now to really set out what the alternatives are. There's more work to do.
Well, I want to come to that, but if I may first deal with the issue of the moment. You were a minister for a long time. This weekend, the country faces a petrol crisis, prospects of shortages in the supermarkets. You actually faced a rather more challenging set of crises as Home Secretary, the fuel duty crisis, foot and mouth, and when you were party chairman and so on. What would you be advising the Cabinet to be doing right now?
Get a real look at the absolute situation. In a sense, Grant Shapps got off a bit light. He's the puppet, and the puppet master, the organ grinder, is Priti Patel, the Home Secretary. The whole issue here is about the immigration criteria and under what basis you can give people the right to work in this country. Brexit made the decision clear. It wasn't the EU, it was the British government. So the question is, could this have been predicted? Well, yes, it could. You gave earlier today the example of Grant Shapps himself predicting it in August. So if it could be predicted, why didn't the weren't steps in place earlier? Secondly, why is it so few? We're talking about 4,000 or so road drivers when there are 100,000 drivers short, when we've got 13,000 drivers less than when we were last in the EU, from the EU. And then finally, why only these sectors? Why only road drivers and poultry? What about care workers? You've been talking to Christina just now. There are significant shortages across the economy. The government has it in its power to resolve those questions right now. And Priti Patel has held out to say no change, no change, no change, no change, until yesterday morning when the Prime Minister overruled her and said they put in the scheme that they're announcing this morning. Too little, too late. You've got to face up to the issue, predict it, get on the case beforehand, and then pull out all the stops. At the moment, the government isn't pulling out any stops at all. It's various injunctions as to how people should behave. But the reality is, when we had those issues in autumn 2000 on the fuel drivers dispute, the foot and mouth crisis, we pulled out all the stops at that time, whatever problem was needed, including up to and including using the army if necessary to help move things forward. I don't see any evidence that Grant Shapps himself or his organ grinder Priti Patel are taking these issues at all seriously. And that's the core point.
Do you think Priti Patel is up to it?
Of course she isn't. She's been a hopeless Home Secretary, and she should have been sacked the last time round. All the commentators, just a couple of weeks ago, all the commentators rightly say that she's got some grip on Boris Johnson. He's frightened of her in the backbenches or whatever it might be, which means she's unsackable as far as Boris Johnson's concerned. But her track record is appalling. It was appalling through COVID, in the whole way she dealt with policing, the civil liberties issue through COVID. It's appalling on immigration, crossing the channel. It's appalling on this issue now. She is the person who has the responsibility for the quotas of people allowed to get visas in this country and on what basis it is. She's deciding that. She's been overruled by the Prime Minister for this short announcement we've got this morning, but she is the person who's responsible. And people like Grant Shapps aren't calling the tricks at all. They're simply doing what she says.
Let's come back to Labour. You were Neil Kinnock's Chief of Staff at the time when the now very famous speech denouncing militant took place, or Kinnock delivered that speech. And you, in fact, had been in Liverpool trying to deal with the problem, as you saw it, of the far left, the militant and so on. Now, it's pretty clear that the party leadership wants to try to tackle a similar problem now. If you were Neil Kinnock's Chief of Staff now, what would you be... Neil Kinnock, I beg your pardon. Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff now, what would you be advising him to do?
Firstly, you have to prepare in each case. In each area, its policy, its organisation, its communication, you have to prepare. That's what we did on Liverpool for that speech about militant that you referred to with Neil. That applies to the constitutional changes we're talking about. I'm in favour of what's going to go through today, I hope, because I think it's a step in the right direction. I think Keir's done well to put it on the agenda. But you've got to prepare very fully and very comprehensively. You can't just bounce it on everybody. Secondly, the outstanding issues that still remain. A large number of disciplinary cases in the Labour Party about anti-Semitism and so on. Thousands, I gather, still unresolved. I would say those have to be resolved and sorted out categorically. They can't hang about in all of these issues as they have to move forward. That's on the organisational side. On the policy side, you have to develop in each area of policy an alternative of what we would be doing, we Labour would be doing, were we in government now. So it's no good simply opposing by attacking the government and saying, you're a load of rubbish. They are a load of rubbish, but that's not enough. You've got to say, if we were there, we'd be doing this in a different way. Whether it's the migration dispute, whether it's what we're talking about today, the fuel drivers dispute or whatever. On every area, we have to say to the British people, there is a better way of doing this, dealing with this problem, and we would be doing it in this way, on COP26 when it comes around, on security, the foreign policy issues, whatever it is. And that has to emerge weekly as it comes through. It's not a great policy for the future, it's a sense of what the Labour alternative is.
We get the sense that, I get the sense that you don't think that actually that's what we're getting this weekend. Instead, what we are probably going to get is 24 hours of conversation about the word scum. Now, you've just used the word rubbish about government. Do you think that that kind of language helps in any way?
In general, no. And I try and censor myself sometimes unsuccessfully on those kinds of things. But I don't think that's the right way to proceed. But I think it is fair for an opposition to say, is the government competent in dealing with this question? So in the case of what we're just talking about now, is the government competent in dealing with the migration issue, with the fuel dispute issue or whatever? If it's not competent, we should draw attention to it.
But this is I'm really asking a question about the way that politics is projected. This is going to hang over the Labour leadership for some time, isn't it? Is the Deputy Leader a person that you can trust to put out there?
She certainly is. I think it may hang over. It depends what people like you and how people like you talk about it. I wasn't aware about it till I heard it, you mention it on this programme today. It's not an enormous issue. As I'm sure Angela herself would say today, it's not the right way to conduct yourself in these circumstances, and she'd seek to control herself in a way that ensured that bad language of that kind, or my use of the word rubbish, is not used, because that's a bad way of conducting politics. But I don't think it's the central question. The central question is, what are the policies government actually doing, and what should Labour be offering as an alternative?
Charles Clarke, thank you very much.
Thank you.